Let's start with this extremely common scenario where we have to get from one ball to the A ball, where both balls are located close to the same side rail. I am practically sure that most players will try to apply a bit of low right spin to get shape on the A ball contacting both side rails. Okay, but what to do when this path is blocked by opponent's balls? This time we have actually two solutions, where in the first one we need to hit the cue ball lower and with bit more right spin, because then we are able to avoid blockers. However, cue ball goes quite high, which may leave us with really uncomfortable shot on the 8 ball. Therefore we can use the second option, where this time our goal is to apply just center ball, which allows the cue ball to follow a natural path across the table. This is much better solution than the previous one, but we need to land quite close to the side rail to avoid leaving uncomfortable shot on the 8 ball. However, this situation can be even more complicated when we block this path as well. This time we need to hit at least at center horizontal line of the cue ball and apply left spin, which allows us to avoid blockers and contact bottom rail for the first time. This free rail positioning is a really repeatable shot, and I would definitely choose this solution when there are no blockers on the table. This one right here looks very easy, but many players still have problems to choose the right solution. The most common choice I see is to hit the cue ball with left spin, which allows us to land on the right side of the table, contacting free rails. The problem appears when we block this path with the opponent's balls. However, here we also have a solution by hitting the cue ball with low right spin. Once again we land on the right side of the table, but this is a very tricky positioning because we can easily end up very close to the rail or just scratch inside pocket, so speed control will be absolutely crucial. But sometimes this path can be blocked as well, and this time comes probably easiest possible solution. But does this mean it is the best? This time we aim to get shape on the A ball to the right side pocket, and we can achieve it by rolling the cue ball with a lot of right spin. I think that positioning to the A ball is quite easy, but many players try to avoid side pockets, so in this case I would recommend the first positioning as the best, where there are no blockers on the table. Going forward, we need to play one ball into this corner pocket and get shape on the 8 ball, which is placed close to top rail. I believe that many players will choose our first solution, where I'm gonna hit the cue ball with topspin so it follows its natural path to land on the right side. However, in my opinion, it would be much better if we landed on the left side of the table, and we can achieve it by applying a bit of top left spin. But same as in previous scenarios, we can block this path using opponent's balls, and in this scenario we can execute a deep draw shot with touch of left spin, which guides the cue ball to the same area like before. However, the situation becomes really complicated when we block access to the right side rail. This time we are forced to use very difficult positioning, where to avoid blockers we have to hit the cue ball quite hard and apply low right spin, which allows us to go through the gap between blockers, where right spin gives additional speed on the rail and cue ball goes to the right side of the table contacting 4 rails. Personally, I believe the first option is the best, and I would definitely recommend it to everyone. Every player has experienced this situation, where I'm sure that most common choice would be to play just center ball and reach position area directly using only one rail. However, when this theoretically easiest path is blocked, we can easily guide the cue ball to the similar position area by applying just top right spin. We are able to avoid blockers and use another rail during positioning, which increases speed control. But sometimes this path is also blocked, and in this case we are forced to guide the cue ball to the left side of the table, and we can achieve it by applying low left spin. This positioning is quite easy to execute, but in my opinion, if there are no blockers on the table, you should choose second option and two-rail positioning to the right side of the table, because we can very easily control path of the cue ball as well as speed of that attempt. Fifth scenario is really interesting, and most players will try to cut one ball into the side pocket using just tiny bit of right spin, which will guide the cue ball through very predictable two-rail positioning. However, what if we block this very promising path? This time we need to change target and play one ball into the top right corner. If we hit the cue ball very soft, just slightly below its center, we can easily leave it on the right side contacting just one rail. But if this path is also blocked, there is only one very creative solution where our goal is to hit the cue ball with bit of low right spin and go around the A-ball using bottom area. Surprisingly, this shot is a very predictable attempt, but if I had to choose one best solution, even though most people will choose the first option, I would recommend the second shot. Cutting one ball into the side pocket involves much less speed control than playing one ball into the corner. If we intentionally use side rail during positioning, this option becomes really predictable. The next scenario is probably one of the most common positioning, which surprisingly generates a big problem in choosing the best option. First of all, we can hit the cue ball with just center left spin, which allows it to use two-rail positioning, contacting bottom rail very close to the corner pocket. However, if we block this path, then we need to use quite uncomfortable shot with inside spin, which makes it possible to avoid blockers and reach position area using only bottom rail. And here comes the biggest problem, where this path is blocked as well. What is very interesting is that many players will try to get through a very small gap between blockers, but using this option will leave a larger angle on the A-ball, which can cause a big problem in many cases. A much better solution in this situation will be to hit the cue ball with top left spin and more speed, which causes it to avoid all blockers and reach the A-ball using top area and free rail positioning. Nevertheless, this solution requires a lot of precision, so in my opinion the best solution with an open table will be the first positioning with center left spin. So why not shot with inside spin and one rail positioning? This shot, although it looks quite promising, requires a lot of precision, because we can very easily misjudge the amount of right spin and just miss the object ball. First option is much more predictable and repeatable, and I believe most players would prefer to play this shot with outside spin to increase confidence. Moving on, we are facing this one ball with quite small angle, and because A-ball is on the other side of the table, many players will choose to play this shot very hard and use only one rail positioning. I do not prefer this type of shot at all, because we can very easily miss object ball, but what if opponent's balls block this path? I believe this will be a pretty obvious choice if I play a smooth follow shot and use two rail positioning, which is very easy to predict. However, the biggest problem arises when this path is also blocked. This time we are actually forced to play a deep draw shot, which allows us to use two or three rail positioning, where we are getting shape on the A-ball from the back. Analyzing all the solutions, I think that almost everyone will choose the second type of positioning, which will be suitable for both beginners and advanced pool players. The next situation is going to be a very tricky one. We experience a quite thin cut shot, and I have seen it many times as players try to roll the cue ball with a lot of outside spin to stay in the top half of the table. This option is not bad at all, but requires extremely high speed control, and most importantly, we can just miss one ball. Blocking this path means we have to look for other solutions, and one of them is once again slow rolling, but this time with the center ball. However, even if we make the one ball, then it is very difficult to stop the cue ball high enough, and in most cases we will lose position. To get a good shape on the A-ball, we have to use more speed and actually 2 table lengths, and we can achieve it by hitting the cue ball just tiny bit below its center. This option is certainly very demanding, but the situation becomes even more interesting if this path is also blocked by the opponent's balls. This time, to avoid blockers and get good shape on the A-ball, we have to hit the cue ball with a bit of inside spin, which allows us to produce very original free rail positioning. Because once again we have to use very long path, this shot is also very challenging to execute, so I would definitely skip this shot, but in my opinion second option gives highest possibility of making one ball and also creating a good shape on the 8-ball. This time it gets really interesting because we experience a reverse angle on the 1-ball, and I think that in this situation the most common choice will be a fairly firm hit with a bit of low right spin to get shape on the 8-ball contacting only one rail. This is actually not bad choice, but if this path is blocked, we can use another solution where this time I'm hitting the cue ball with bit of top right spin. Cue ball hits bottom rail first, very close to the corner pocket, where right spin gives additional speed, which makes it much easier to reach the optimal area. However, blocking this path as well puts us in a very difficult position, because we have to execute a very demanding deep draw shot with a bit of right spin. I'm pretty sure many players would choose the first positioning as the best one, but in my opinion the second solution gives the best chance of avoiding problems, because we use quite little speed and follow a very safe path. We are reaching the most interesting point of this episode, where we face this very tricky shot down the rail. Our first quite obvious solution requires from us to hit relatively soft and apply a bit of left spin. During this one rail positioning we may scratch in corner pocket, so in this case we should intentionally use right side rail, and we can achieve this by reducing the amount of side spin. This makes this shot very promising and quite easy to execute. By blocking this path, we make positioning to the right side practically impossible, so our next solution will be hitting the cue ball with very similar spin as before, but this time we have to use much more speed. This shot allows us to avoid blockers and guide the cue ball towards left side of the table. However, the situation becomes very complicated when we place the opponent's balls, blocking the possibility of playing a follow shot. This time the only way to get shape on the A-ball is playing a deep draw shot with bit of right spin, which allows us to produce impressive 4-rail path. It is extremely difficult to choose one option because each has its pros and cons, but ultimately I would go for the first solution and controlled positioning using right side rail to increase speed control and avoid scratching. Making the right decision is absolutely crucial when executing common shots, so I would like to encourage you to watch this video, where I present how to escape 10 critical situations.